Hi, my name is Rick Garriques, and I'm a scout with Troop 124. Today, you're going to learn a little bit about feral cats, as well as how to make a shelter to keep them safe and protected and to give them a place to go. Did you know that there are over 50 million feral cats currently wandering around the United States? That's a lot. To combat this ever-growing population, feral cats are often trapped, neutered, and released in order to keep the population numbers down. This process, also known as TNR, or more commonly referred to as catch and release, begins by humanely trapping the feral cats, taking them someplace they can be spayed and neutered, and then returning them to their habitats in the wild. Although they are often confused for one another, stray cats and feral cats are not the same. A stray cat is usually a lost or abandoned pet, while a feral cat is a cat who is living on its own or possibly with its mother for a period of time out in the wild. While a feral cat can become a pet, I wouldn't recommend it. Unless the feral cats are kittens, in which case you should still be wary. Feral cats are usually adjusted to where they're living in the wild, and to take them out is to displace them and to make them extremely uncomfortable. If you think you see a feral cat, or if you know if there is one around you, and you aren't sure what to do, the first thing you should do is to check their ears. You want to look for an ear tip, which is a little slice off the top of one ear. If you see this means that the cat has already been spayed and neutered. The ear tip is the international symbol for a community cat that has already been spayed and neutered. If there is no ear tip, however, you should contact a local organization like Please, who help to humanely take them through the TNR or catch and release process. Do not take them to a shelter. If you take them to a shelter, there is a good chance that they will be euthanized because they are not considered adoptable. Please contact a trusted local agency or organization that you have researched and that you know will treat them humanely. After this process is done, or if you know if there's a cat around that already has an ear tip, then you may want to consider building a shelter for them so that they can be safe, comfortable, and protected throughout all seasons. Now let's take a look at how to build a shelter.
First, make sure you have an open area and a table or something to work on. For our materials, we need two 2-foot by 4-foot, 1-inch thick sheets of foam board. We'll need two 1-foot 2x4s, an 8-gallon storage bin and snap lid for the basic structure, and an X-Acto knife, or a knife with a replaceable blade to cut through the foam. You may also want a pocket knife or a longer knife for later in the process. We'll need a Sharpie or marking tool of some kind, duct tape, a yardstick or straight edge, and then dimensions for each side. We made cardboard templates as several were made during the day of filming, but you can measure out your own templates or simply draw them out based on the dimensions with the yardstick. I will put the dimensions for each piece on screen now. We will need 8 number 8 by 1 5/8 inches wood screws and a drill with the proper bit. And finally, although not pictured, we will need a few handfuls of straw, but be careful not to use hay, as cats are susceptible to hay fever and they should not be around it. Demonstrating how to build one of these shelters for us today is Eagle Scout Scott Ryan. To start, we first lay out our templates and outline the two short sides next to each other. They can go right next to each other if you match the two sides of the pieces by having them drawn opposite, like so. After this, we will draw a straight line from one side of the foam to the other to cut excess off and make the pieces easier to cut. As there is room left on the smaller sheet we now have, we will outline the bottom piece with the space below the short sides. A good word of advice is to try to keep all of the pieces along the edges, so that one side is already straight and does not have to be cut. You'll notice now that he is drawing lines to further extend where the pieces will end. As you are cutting, you want to make clean, straight cuts that go from one end of the foam board to the other. So these overextended lines show where he will cut first. When all these outlines are done, it should look something like this. Now we move on to the first bit of cutting. Using a straight edge or yardstick and knife, you want to lay out the yardstick on the inside of the outlined piece, and then keeping the blade against the outside edge of the yardstick and the piece, you will cut straight down the now marked line. You want to keep the yardstick on the inside of the piece and the knife on the outside edge to minimize the chances of any possible mistakes, such as cutting the foam into the piece, bumps in the line, or cutting into a different piece on the same foam board. This also allows you to sand down any notable bumps or unevenness if you must after the piece is cut. You'll see that Scott is breaking the cut boards over his knee. You can do this for most of the bigger pieces, but as the excess becomes smaller, you can also use the end of your table as well as just your hands to break them off, both of which Scott will do later in the video. For the rest of the pieces, the process is the same. With what's left over of the very first cut, we will outline the lid piece and cut it like I have described previously. The difference here is that once the main rectangle is cut, you need to cut the corners so that it will fit in the top of the storage bin. We now move on to the second board, where we will cut our final two pieces, both long sides. We line up the long side with one end and flip the template on the short edge to reduce the number of cuts and to make less waste. Foam is recyclable, so put it out with your weekly recycling collection or take it to a foam recycling drop-off. If you can't do either of these, break your larger excess foam down to smaller pieces and put it out with the trash. We will cut the main chunk of excess off first, and then we cut like previously explained. Now that all the pieces are cut out, we will check them to make sure that they fit. To check that each piece fits and is well cut, we put them in the bin. First, put in the two short sides. Then put in the long sides, and be sure to push them down and towards the outside of the bin so that they are slightly squished, holding themselves and the shorter sides in place. And finally, we put the bottom in and push it down well so that it fits nice and snug. If all is good, it should look something like this. Next, we will cut out the hole for the cat to get in and out of. This part can be a little difficult depending on the knife you use and the material the bin is made out of. First, we measure an inch down from the handle overhang and make a mark, and then 6 inches down from that point and do the same. Then draw lines at both points. You will then grab your knife and cut these lines and the sides of the center of the bin where the material pops out. This can be difficult as the bin does not cut as easily as the foam, and especially if your knife is not sharp or durable enough. As you can see, even we had a little bit of trouble. You want to make sure your knife is in a good enough condition so that you don't accidentally hurt yourself. If you don't feel safe doing this part, that's okay. Find a better knife, sharpen yours, or find someone else to help you with it. If you have someone else to hold the bin in place, you can use a jigsaw in the place of a knife. When it's all done, it should look something like this. Next, we will cut out the same hole, but in one of the short sides. Start by putting all of the pieces except the lid into the bin like before. This will hold them in place while you mark the hole on the end of the board. Once the hole is traced onto the foam board, we start by cutting the lines like before with the X-Acto knife or a knife with a replaceable blade. Once the usual cutting is done, Scott switches to his pocket knife to cut all the way through. It should be noted that while this cutting is happening, we have a piece of cardboard underneath to not harm or damage the table. Now we move on to attaching the 2x4s. Using a ruler or yardstick, measure 2 inches in from the short side end of the bin. Then make one mark there and another mark an inch to 1.5 inches apart from the first mark. You want to make sure to do this at each edge. Once these are done, we're going to use the drill to make a hole at each mark. After the holes have been drilled, we set up our 2 blocks of wood underneath, and then we start to put the screws in. The only thing to note while screwing into the blocks is that you have to be careful that the screw does not go all the way through the bin, as this occurs easily and you may have to get a new bin if you put most of the screws all the way through. Go slowly and note when the material of the bin turns white. That's when you should stop. When you're done, the blocks should be attached and look like this. Once this is done, we want to put the foam back in, just like we did before, and then grab our duct tape. We use our duct tape to tape over each inside edge so that everything stays nice and insulated. We then put duct tape all around the inside of the entrance to connect the foam and the bin, as well as to make sure there are no rough edges that might hurt a cat. Finally, we put straw inside the bottom of the shelter so that the cats can be nice and warm throughout the season, and so that the straw can be replaced if need be. Then we put on both lids, making sure that they fit snug and correctly, so that no rain or weather can get in. And then, voila, we have a completed shelter ready for any feral cats who may need a home.